Hey guys, so I just got back from New York where I finally got to see The Rings of Power during a special screening of the first 2 episodes. The audience was mostly comprised of Tolkien fans of varying degrees of fandom. I was able to invite a group of folks which ranged from super excited about the series to very skeptical. Some have read all of Tolkien's works, some have read a couple, and some had only ever seen Peter Jackson's films. I'll give you a rundown of how some of these folks felt in a bit, but first I'll give you my thoughts. Now I do want to keep this spoiler-free, so I won't be going into fine details, but I'll give you a sense of how I felt about the first 2-ish hours of this planned 50-hour series. A quick FYI, if you're one of those who's fully dedicated to either hating or loving this show regardless of its actual content, this review, or any of my coverage on this series, likely won't be something you'll be interested in. But if you want an honest opinion and you're interested in nuanced assessments and respectful conversations around the world of Tolkien and its adaptations, I think you'll enjoy the Nerd of the Rings community. Now for those who haven't been around the channel as much, here's a quick frame of reference of where I've landed on other Tolkien adaptations. In my mind, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy is a complete masterpiece, 10 out of 10. Sure, there's moments that bend the lore, but in my opinion, it captures the themes and heart of Tolkien's world in the most incredible ways. The Hobbit trilogy is a 6. There's moments and glimpses of greatness, but it's weighed down by moments of weak CG, a super annoying original character, and even the enjoyable original character is given a terrible love triangle storyline. I still enjoy watching it for its great moments, but I don't put it on nearly as often as Lord of the Rings. Side note, if you've never experienced it, my other all-time favorite adaptation is the 1981 BBC radio drama. I absolutely love it. Now with that in mind, let's get to The Rings of Power. First off, as I think many expected, the show looks absolutely incredible. I think when hearing the rumors of how much the show has cost, many assumed it would, but it's still nice to know that this is the case. It not only looks like a film, it looks like a well-made film. The craftsmanship and cinematography on display is quite simply fantastic. In some of my other fandoms like Star Wars and Marvel, I've seen instances where the visuals just don't hold up to their film counterparts. And for me, it's always a reminder like, oh yeah, this is just a TV show. Rings of Power is nothing like that. It's every bit a cinematic experience through these first 2 episodes, and I hope and expect that to continue through the series. I'm definitely recommending people watch it on the biggest screen that they can. When it comes to the sound, I'll have to hear more as some of these themes reappear and intertwine throughout the season, but having already listened to much of Bear McCreary's soundtrack, I was eager to see how the music and visuals paired together. There were times where the music was very present, and I took a lot of notice, and others where it didn't stick out as much, but I realized there was never any point where I felt like it didn't fit with what I was seeing. And those moments I took notice of were some truly great moments. As you may have seen me post about on some of my other socials, one of my favorite tracks is Khazad-dum, and when it kicks in for the first time, it is a moment. And quite frankly, it's a moment I can't wait to watch again and a location I'm dying to see more of. As far as the performances, there were some that really stood out. For me, I was more concerned going in on this first viewing with whether I would be taken out of the experience by any poor performances, or just plain bad characters, which I'm glad to say I wasn't. There were a couple lines of dialogue here and there that felt so-so to me, but these moments are eclipsed by others that were packed with deeper meaning. Having a rough idea of what this series does and doesn't have rights to, the fact that there are multiple instances throughout that reward those of us who have delved deep into the books was a welcome surprise. I'm sure it's a fine line to tread when copyrights and licensing are involved, but the fact that we can have a scene between 2 characters where the dialogue brings to the surface all the deeper meaning of their histories feels like it's done intentionally for fans like me, who love everything from Eru the One, who in Arda is called Iluvatar, and he made the first Ainur, to the scribbled notes of the Dagor Dagorath and the second music. Now, characters and storylines will of course change over time, and it's an area that I'll be watching. As anyone who has watched my videos on this show before will know, there are characters and storylines that I'm really looking forward to in this series. and there's ones that I'm not sold on their necessity, and I'm curious to see how big of a footprint these things will have on the overall story. So while I've made it no secret I don't think hobbits are entirely necessary and could even hurt the overall story if used too much, there was nothing that reached Alfred levels of frustration from having them there, at least in these first 2 episodes. And while that specific storyline remains a wait and see for me, I wanted to mention that there was a particular character I was pleasantly surprised by, who I honestly thought was miscast based purely on the design of the character. For all its flaws in terms of the lore, I really liked the depiction of Celebrimbor in the Shadow of Mordor games, as he seemed like a Feanor 2.0. So it came as a pleasant surprise that I really enjoyed Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor in his brief screen time in these first 2 episodes. There's some great dialogue that again references the deeper lore, and we already begin to see small glimpses of how and why certain things will play out with this character, without the dialogue broadcasting it with flashing neon lights. I honestly think one of my biggest frustrations with this show will actually be the series format. We've never had a TV show made of Middle-earth, so for the most part we've been able to see the bulk of stories play out from beginning to end in a single sitting. Having to wait a week between episodes, while a temporary problem, will no doubt be frustrating for those like me who love experiencing a grand tale told over 3 to 4 hours, or in 12-hour marathons, rather than waiting for a week after a cliffhanger. Perhaps I'll be able to grow more accustomed to it as the episodes go on. The other thing I found myself slightly annoyed by was the pacing. Perhaps it's because I naturally want to soak everything in and try to remember every detail, but each scene felt like it went by quite fast. And there were a couple times where we cut from something I was really interested in, and I felt a bit annoyed at being taken away. It's very hard for me to theorize where this season will end, having seen these 2 episodes. On one hand, it's only 2 episodes. On the other hand, it's 25% of the season. I find myself both wanting the show to slow down to allow me to relish in some of the great locales and characters, while also thinking we've got big things we need to get to and a finite amount of time to get there. And it's this dichotomy that made me realize that quite simply I wanted to see more of this show. While there will no doubt be things that I would have done differently along the way, things both big and small, I want to see more of this world and the characters and stories on display here. And while I've always known I'd be watching at least the first season regardless, because I feel it's the best way to judge a series and because of my Middle-earth addiction, I can honestly say that it's a ride that I'm now excited to go on. A bit anxious, sure, but gone are my darkest fears that this would be an utter train wreck. If these first 2 episodes are any indication, it is certainly not that. As many of us have known since the day it was announced as a Second Age series, there will be original storylines, characters, and dialogue. There simply isn't enough source material to paint an entire picture of the Second Age without doing so. Now, these things that are original may not work for everyone, but having seen 2 episodes with my own eyes, I can say that I think even those with a lot of skepticism, if they're willing to give the show a chance, will find some things to enjoy within this series. It's a show full of visual splendor, top-notch craftsmanship, actors clearly dedicated to these roles, and while I think it's still too early to tell, hopefully it will be one that captures the heart and magic of Tolkien's world. I don't know if every single thing in this show is going to work for me, but because of what I've seen thus far, I'm eager and excited to go along for the ride and find out. Now, going back to those folks I spoke about in the intro who also attended the screening, I asked for a 0 to 10 score from each, with 0 being utter garbage that nobody should watch, and 10 being it was fantastic and a must-watch. Together, the average score was a 7.9, with 9.5 being the highest and 6 being the lowest. The most common score was an 8, given by half the group, including myself. When it comes to the overall experience of watching these episodes, it sure seems like we're getting something much closer to Lord of the Rings than The Hobbit. I'm eager to share more of the thoughts and conversations from myself and the group of attendees when we go into spoiler territory. And it's these moments where I spoke with dozens of book fans and movie fans, casual fans and scholars, that one thing was clear. This show has the ability to pull people deeper into Tolkien's world, and it will bring new fans into the fray, which is a beautiful thing. and it's sure to spark conversations revolving around not only the show, but Tolkien's books and the adaptations that have come before. And for those of us who've been around the fandom for a while, you'll recognize what a wonderful thing this can be. For part of the magic of Middle-earth is what happens outside its pages, or its artwork, or its frames of film. It's in a world so powerful that it brings together folks from all walks of life, bound by a mutual love of this man and the world he created. These first 2 episodes are captivating and beautiful, and very clearly made with a love for the world. And for this Tolkien fan of over 20 years now, I'm quite ready for another adventure in Middle-earth. And if you're interested in watching the show, don't forget to tune in to our watch party on Thursday night. We'll have a brief pre-show before, then all play the first 2 episodes together, followed by discussion immediately after. So make sure you're subscribed with your notifications on so you don't miss the watch parties each week here on Nerd of the Rings. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Kella Brimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, and Debbie. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.